Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his weathered face as he surveyed the cracked earth beneath his boots. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on his failing ranch, where cattle bones bleached white among the dead mesquite trees. 3 years of drought had stripped him of everything he once called his own. The bank notice crumpled in his back pocket served as a constant reminder that he had 30 days to find $2,000 or lose the land his grandfather had died defending. The 42-year-old rancher had watched his neighbors pack up and leave one by one, their dreams crushed by the relentless heat and empty skies. But Samuel couldn't bring himself to abandon the place where his wife Martha lay buried beneath the old oak tree. She had made him promise on her deathbed to never give up on their dream, and even though she'd been gone for 5 years, her words still echoed in his mind during the long, sleepless nights. On this particular scorching afternoon in August 1887, Samuel was mending a broken fence when he heard the sound that would change everything. Gunshots echoed across the valley, followed by the thundering of horses and desperate cries. He grabbed his rifle and climbed onto his horse, racing toward the commotion near the river that marked the boundary between his property and Apache territory. What he discovered there made his blood run cold. 2 young Apache women, barely more than girls, huddled behind a fallen cottonwood tree. The older one, perhaps 19, clutched a bleeding wound on her arm while shielding her younger sister, who couldn't have been more than 16. Their torn clothing and terrified expressions told the story of a violent encounter. In the distance, Samuel could see a group of men on horseback riding away, their laughter carrying on the wind like a vulture's call. The older sister raised a knife with her good hand, her dark eyes flashing with defiance despite her obvious pain. She spoke in rapid Apache, words Samuel couldn't understand but whose meaning was crystal clear. She would fight to protect her sister until her last breath. The younger girl whispered something that sounded like a prayer, her hands pressed against what appeared to be injuries hidden beneath her torn dress. Samuel slowly dismounted, keeping his hands visible and speaking in the gentle tone he once used to calm spooked cattle. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, though he doubted they understood English. "Those men are gone. You're safe now." The older sister's grip on the knife tightened, and Samuel realized that safe was probably not a word these young women had reason to believe anymore. The sound of approaching horses made all 3 of them freeze. Samuel turned to see a dust cloud rising in the distance. The men were coming back, probably realizing they had left witnesses to whatever horrible thing they had done. Without thinking, Samuel made a decision that would either save these girls or get all 3 of them killed. He gestured frantically toward his ranch house, pointing and repeating, "Safe, safe," while holding out his hands in a gesture of peace. The older sister looked into his eyes for what felt like an eternity, weighing his intentions against the approaching danger. Finally, she helped her sister to her feet, and together they stumbled toward Samuel's horse. The younger girl was in worse shape than he had initially realized. Her face was pale and she could barely stand. Samuel boosted them both onto his horse and led them quickly toward his property, praying that the rickety old ranch house would provide enough shelter. As they reached the house, Samuel could see the riders clearly now. 5 rough-looking men with guns and ropes, the kind who made their living preying on the weak and defenseless. They had stopped at the river, apparently deciding whether to cross onto Samuel's land. The rancher knew that his property rights wouldn't mean much to men like these, but it might make them think twice about the consequences of their actions. He helped the Apache sisters into his house, noting how the older one immediately positioned herself between her sister and the door, still clutching that knife. The younger girl collapsed into a chair, her breathing shallow and labored. Samuel grabbed his medical supplies, the same kit he used for injured cattle, knowing it would have to do. As he worked to clean the older sister's arm wound, he couldn't help but notice the intelligence in her eyes, the way she watched his every movement while never relaxing her guard. Outside, the sound of horses grew closer, and Samuel realized that his decision to help these young women had just made him an enemy of some very dangerous men. He had risked everything on the hope that doing what was right might somehow change his luck. As he looked at the 2 sisters, one defiant and protective, the other hurt but unbroken, Samuel Morrison understood that his life was about to become far more complicated than a simple matter of saving his ranch. These weren't just 2 Apache women in need of help. They were someone's daughters, someone's sisters, and their disappearance would not go unnoticed by their people. The sound of his dog barking frantically outside told Samuel that the men had reached his property. Through the window he could see them spreading out, surrounding his house like wolves circling wounded prey. The older sister stood up despite her injury, positioning herself at the window with the knife ready. Samuel loaded his rifle, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his act of mercy would be remembered as heroism or foolishness. Either way, there was no turning back now. The leader of the 5 horsemen, a scarred man named Jake Brennan, dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation. Samuel recognized him immediately. Everyone in 3 counties knew Brennan's reputation as a bounty hunter who cared little about whether his targets were brought back alive or dead. The silver star pinned to his vest was as tarnished as his conscience, a badge that gave him just enough authority to justify his cruelty. "Morrison," Brennan called out, his voice carrying the mock friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "We're tracking 2 Apache squaws who attacked some travelers down by the river. Seems they ran this direction. You seen anything unusual today?" His companions spread out around the house, hands resting casually on their weapons. Samuel noticed how they positioned themselves to block any escape routes. These men had done this before. Through the thin walls of his house, Samuel could hear the older Apache sister whispering urgently to her younger sibling in their native tongue. He stepped onto his porch, rifle held loosely in his arms, trying to project calm confidence while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Haven't seen anyone, Brennan. Been working on the north fence all afternoon." The lie came easier than he expected, perhaps because the alternative, handing over 2 injured young women to men like these, was unthinkable. Brennan's eyes narrowed as he studied Samuel's face, looking for any tell that might betray deception. "That's funny, Morrison, because we tracked them right to your property line. Fresh horse tracks leading straight to your front door." He gestured to one of his men who began walking around the house, peering through windows. Samuel's blood ran cold as he realized he had left obvious signs of his rescue mission. "My horse gets spooked easy," Samuel said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Been riding him hard today, trying to round up what's left of my cattle. You know how it is." It was partially true. His old horse was skittish, and he had been desperately searching for any livestock that might help him raise the money to save his ranch. But Brennan wasn't buying the explanation. The bounty hunter stepped closer, close enough that Samuel could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the cruel satisfaction in his pale blue eyes. "See, here's what I think happened, Morrison. I think you found those Apache girls and decided to play hero. Maybe you're thinking they might show you some gratitude, if you catch my meaning." His companions chuckled at the crude implication, and Samuel felt his grip tighten on his rifle. "You're wrong, Brennan. There's nobody here but me." Samuel's voice carried a finality that made the bounty hunter pause. Behind that simple statement lay years of grief, loss, and the quiet dignity of a man who had already sacrificed everything he loved. He thought of Martha's grave beneath the oak tree, of the promise he had made to her about never giving up on what was right. At that moment, a soft sound came from inside the house. The younger Apache girl had apparently knocked something over in her weakened state. Brennan's head snapped toward the noise like a hunting dog catching a scent. "What was that, Morrison? Sounds like you've got company after all." The other men began moving toward the house, hands now openly resting on their guns. Samuel stepped into their path, his rifle no longer held casually. "That's far enough. This is my property and you're not welcome here." The words came out with surprising strength, backed by the righteous anger of a man defending innocent lives. For the first time in years, Samuel Morrison felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered. Brennan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're outnumbered 5-1, Morrison. Even if you get 1 or 2 of us, the rest will finish you and take those girls anyway. Why die for a couple of savages who probably can't even speak English?" The racial slur hung in the air like poison, revealing the true nature of these men and their intentions. "Because it's the right thing to do," Samuel replied simply. The words carried the weight of his late wife's moral compass, the values she had tried to instill in him during their too brief marriage. He had failed at many things, as a rancher, as a provider, as a man who couldn't even keep his wife alive through her illness. But he would not fail at this. The standoff stretched taut as a violin string, 5 armed men against 1 desperate rancher and 2 injured young women. Samuel calculated his chances and found them wanting, but something had hardened inside him, a resolve forged in loss and tempered by righteous anger. If these were to be his last moments, at least they would be spent defending the innocent, rather than watching his dreams crumble. Then, from the distance came a sound that changed everything. The rhythmic thunder of many horses approaching fast. Brennan's head whipped toward the horizon where a dust cloud was rising, much larger than the one his small group had created. Samuel squinted against the setting sun and felt his heart stop. At least 20 Apache warriors were riding hard toward his ranch, their war paint and weapons glinting in the fading light. "Looks like your friends showed up, Morrison," Brennan snarled, but Samuel could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. 5 men with badges could intimidate one lone rancher, but 20 Apache warriors answering a call for help was an entirely different matter. The bounty hunter's eyes darted between the approaching riders and the house where the sisters were hiding, calculating odds that were rapidly turning against him. Samuel realized that the older sister must have signaled somehow during their journey to his house, perhaps leaving marks that her people could follow. As the Apache riders drew closer, he could see they were armed for war, their faces painted with the fierce determination of men coming to rescue their own. The penniless rancher found himself standing between two forces, holding the lives of 2 young women in his weathered hands, with choices that would echo through the rest of his days. The Apache war party thundered to a halt just outside Samuel's property, their horses snorting and stamping in the dusty earth. At their head rode a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Tall, weathered by sun and wind, with silver threading through his long black hair and eyes that seemed to see into a man's soul. Even without knowing Apache customs, Samuel recognized a leader when he saw one. The eagle feathers in the warrior's hair and the elaborate beadwork on his clothing spoke of high rank within the tribe. Brennan and his men had unconsciously clustered together, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of overwhelming numbers. The bounty hunter's hand hovered near his gun, but even his whiskey-soaked brain understood that drawing a weapon now would be suicide. "This is still American territory," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "We're operating under legal authority here." The Apache leader's gaze swept over the scene, taking in every detail with the practiced eye of a man who had survived countless conflicts. When his eyes found Samuel standing protectively in front of his house, rifle in hand but not aimed at anyone, something shifted in his expression. He spoke a few words in Apache to his warriors, who remained mounted but ready, then swung down from his horse with fluid grace. Samuel felt the weight of history pressing down on him as the Apache leader approached. This was Chief Running Bear, whose name was spoken with equal parts respect and fear throughout the territory. Samuel had heard stories of the chief's tactical brilliance, his fierce protection of his people, and his attempts to find peace in an increasingly violent world. Now those legendary eyes were fixed on Samuel's simple ranch house, where the chief's daughters were hiding. "My daughters," Chief Running Bear said in careful English, his voice carrying the gravity of mountains. "Men took them from our lands. We followed the trail here." His pronunciation was precise, each word chosen with deliberation. Samuel realized that this leader understood far more English than he let on, probably a valuable skill in negotiating with white settlers and government officials. Samuel nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off the chief's face. "They're safe. Hurt but safe. I found them by the river." He gestured toward his house. "The younger one needs medical attention. I've done what I can," but he let the sentence hang, hoping the chief would understand that his intentions were protective, not harmful. Chief Running Bear studied Samuel for a long moment, reading the sincerity in his weathered features and the way he positioned himself between potential threats and the house. The chief had spent decades learning to judge the character of white men, separating the honest from the treacherous, and something in this poor rancher's stance spoke of genuine honor. "You helped them," he said simply. "Why?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a sacred fire. Samuel thought of all the complicated answers he could give, about Martha's teachings, about doing what was right, about the way the older sister's fierce protectiveness reminded him of his late wife's courage. Instead, he gave the simplest truth. Because they needed help. Brennan chose that moment to assert himself, stepping forward with the bluster of a man trying to regain control of a situation slipping away from him. "Now hold on here, Chief. These girls are wanted for attacking white settlers. We're just doing our job, bringing them to justice." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, but Samuel could see it land wrong with Chief Running Bear, whose expression darkened like a storm cloud gathering strength. "Justice," the chief repeated, the word carrying the weight of bitter experience. He looked at Brennan with the kind of controlled anger that wise men fear more than explosive rage. "You speak of justice while hunting my daughters like animals." His warriors shifted restlessly behind him, hands moving closer to their weapons. The air itself seemed to grow thicker with tension. Samuel realized that the situation was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one aggressive move, and this dusty patch of Texas would become a battleground. He thought of the two young women inside his house, the older one probably listening at the door, ready to fight to her last breath, and the younger one struggling with injuries that needed proper care. Whatever happened next would determine not just their fate, but possibly the future relationship between the Apache and the struggling white settlers in the region. "Chief Running Bear," Samuel said, taking a careful step forward, "your daughters are brave." The older one never stopped protecting her sister, even when she was hurt herself. "You raised them well." It wasn't flattery. It was the honest admiration of one parent speaking to another. Even though Samuel's own children existed only in the dreams that died with Martha, the chief's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. In the Apache way, protecting family was the highest honor, and this white rancher had recognized that virtue in his daughters. "You saw this courage," like Chief Running Bear said, and it wasn't quite a question. "I saw a warrior," Samuel replied, using the word with the respect it deserved. Both of them fought like warriors. He glanced back at his house, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you like to see them? To make sure they're truly all right?" The offer hung between them like a bridge across a canyon. Samuel was inviting an Apache war chief and his armed warriors onto his property, into his home, while 5 bounty hunters watched with growing alarm. It was either the gesture of a man with nothing left to lose or the action of someone who understood that trust sometimes required taking the first dangerous step. Chief Running Bear's eyes searched Samuel's face one more time, looking for any sign of deception or trap. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "I would see my daughters." He turned to his warriors and spoke in rapid Apache. Several of them dismounted while others remained on their horses, creating a protective perimeter. Brennan and his men found themselves effectively surrounded, their earlier advantage completely reversed. As they walked toward the house together, Samuel wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or taking the first step toward something that might save not just his ranch but his soul. Behind them, Brennan cursed under his breath, realizing that his prey had just gained the protection of one of the most powerful chiefs in the territory. The bounty hunter's simple hunting expedition had suddenly become a diplomatic incident with potentially deadly consequences. The moment Chief Running Bear stepped through Samuel's doorway, the atmosphere in the small ranch house changed completely. The older daughter, who had been crouched protectively near her injured sister, dropped her knife and rushed into her father's arms with a cry of relief that transcended language barriers. Samuel watched as the fierce warrior he had admired transformed back into a young woman, finding safety in her father's embrace, tears streaming down her face as she spoke rapidly in Apache. Chief Running Bear held his elder daughter close, listening intently to her words while his experienced eyes assessed her injuries. Samuel could see the chief's jaw tighten as she described whatever had happened at the river, her gestures making it clear that the encounter with Brennan's men had been far more violent than the bounty hunter had admitted. The chief's attention then shifted to his younger daughter, who lay pale and weak in Samuel's old wooden chair. The younger girl, whom Samuel would later learn was called Morning Star, managed a weak smile for her father but couldn't hide the pain that clouded her dark eyes. Chief Running Bear knelt beside her, speaking in gentle tones that seemed to give her strength just by their sound. He examined her injuries with the careful touch of someone well-versed in battlefield wounds, his expression growing increasingly grim. "She needs the medicine woman," Chief Running Bear said to Samuel, switching back to English. "But she cannot ride far like this." The chief's dilemma was clear. His daughter needed traditional Apache healing, but the journey back to their settlement might kill her in her weakened condition. Samuel realized he was witnessing a father's desperate calculation between two impossible choices. "She can stay here," Samuel offered without hesitation. "I've got clean water, supplies, whatever you need." The words came out before he could fully consider their implications. He was offering to shelter an Apache girl in his home while her people treated her essentially making himself responsible for her safety and recovery. It was either an act of remarkable compassion or remarkable foolishness. Chief Running Bear studied Samuel's face with those penetrating eyes. You would do this? Keep her safe while she heals? There was something in his tone that suggested this decision carried weight beyond just medical necessity. Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. He thought of Martha again, how she had once nursed a wounded wolf back to health, despite his protests that it might turn on them. The wolf had eventually left, but not before leaving a dead rabbit on their porch as thanks. The older daughter, whose name was Swift Eagle, spoke urgently to her father in Apache. Samuel couldn't understand the words, but her tone suggested she was volunteering to stay with her sister. Chief Running Bear shook his head firmly, replying in a voice that brooked no argument. From their body language, Samuel gathered that the chief wanted Swift Eagle to return home with the war party, while Morning Star recovered. My daughter Swift Eagle says she will not leave her sister, Chief Running Bear explained to Samuel. But I tell her the tribe needs her knowledge of what happened here. She must speak to the council. The chief's position as leader was clear in his words. Personal feelings had to be weighed against tribal responsibilities. Swift Eagle looked, torn between duty and love, her eyes moving between her father and her injured sister. Outside, Samuel could hear Brennan shouting something about jurisdiction and legal authority, his voice growing more desperate as he realized his quarry was slipping away under the protection of both an Apache war chief and a stubborn rancher. The bounty hunters' protests fell on deaf ears as the Apache warriors maintained their watchful perimeter, ensuring that no harm would come to their chief while he attended to his daughters. Samuel made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Swift Eagle can stay too if she wants. I've got room. The offer was simple but profound. He was volunteering to house both Apache sisters while one recovered, essentially making his failing ranch into neutral ground between two worlds that rarely found common cause. The silence that followed his words stretched long enough for Samuel to question his sanity. He was a broke rancher about to lose his land, offering shelter to two Apache women while their father's war party faced down 5 armed bounty hunters in his front yard. If someone had told him a week ago that his life would take such a turn, he would have suggested they lay off the whiskey. Chief Running Bear's expression was unreadable as he considered this unexpected development. Samuel could almost see the calculations running through the chief's mind, the risks and benefits of leaving both daughters with this strange white man, who asked for nothing in return. Why do you offer this? The chief finally asked. What do you want from us? It was a fair question. In the chief's experience, white men rarely offered help without expecting something valuable in return: land, safe passage, trade advantages, or information about Apache movements. Samuel's answer would either build a bridge of trust or confirm the chief's suspicions about white treachery. I don't want anything, Samuel said honestly. Your daughters are hurt. They need time to heal. This seems like the safest place for that to happen. He gestured toward the window where they could see Brennan pacing angrily among his men. Those bounty hunters won't give up easy, but they won't risk attacking Apache women under my roof with your warriors watching. Chief Running Bear nodded slowly, beginning to understand Samuel's reasoning. The ranch could serve as neutral territory, a place where his daughters could recover while remaining under their people's protection. It was an elegant solution to an impossible problem, if he could trust this weathered rancher who seemed to have nothing left to lose. Swift Eagle spoke again in Apache, her voice carrying a note of urgency. Chief Running Bear listened, then looked at Samuel with something that might have been the beginning of respect. My daughter says you fought to protect them when you could have hidden in your house. She says you were not afraid of the bad men. The chief's English became more formal when he was moved, Samuel noticed, as if emotion required extra care with the foreign words. I was scared to death, Samuel admitted with a rueful smile. But that didn't seem like a good enough reason to let them get hurt. His honesty seemed to strike a chord with Chief Running Bear, who valued courage but respected the wisdom to acknowledge fear. In the Apache way, bravery without fear was merely recklessness, but action despite fear was true valor. The chief, made his decision with the finality of a man accustomed to command. My daughters will stay until Morningstar can travel safely, but I leave warriors to watch over them. It wasn't quite trust, Samuel realized, but it was the beginning of something that might grow into trust, given time and honorable actions. 3 weeks passed like pages in a book Samuel never expected to read. His failing ranch had transformed into something resembling a small diplomatic mission, with Apache warriors maintaining a respectful but vigilant watch from the hills, while Swift Eagle and Morningstar recovered in his simple home. Samuel discovered that the sisters spoke more English than they had initially let on, a survival skill their father had insisted they learn to better understand the changing world around them. Morningstar's recovery was slow but steady. The younger sister had suffered internal injuries that required careful attention and complete rest, something the Apache medicine woman who visited daily made abundantly clear through a combination of broken English and meaningful gestures. Samuel found himself learning basic Apache phrases while Swift Eagle improved her English, their conversations becoming a bridge between two very different ways of seeing the world. Swift Eagle proved to be remarkably intelligent and curious about everything from Samuel's cattle ranching methods to the books Martha had left behind. She would sit by the window during the day, watching for any sign of Brennan's return while helping her sister regain her strength. Samuel noticed how she never fully relaxed, always positioning herself between Morningstar and any potential threat. Just as she had that first terrible day by the river, the Apache guards rotated regularly, with Chief Running Bear visiting every few days to check on his daughter's progress. During these visits, Samuel began to understand the depth of the chief's burden, leading a people caught between their traditional ways and the relentless pressure of westward expansion. The chief spoke carefully about the challenges his tribe faced, testing Samuel's reactions to topics that could easily become sources of conflict. On a cool morning when the first hints of autumn touched the Texas sky, Chief Running Bear arrived with news that would change everything. He found Samuel repairing the same fence that had been broken the day he first encountered the sisters, a task that had become oddly therapeutic over the past weeks. "Morrison," the chief called out using the formal address he employed when discussing serious matters. Samuel straightened up, wiping his hands on his work clothes. He had learned to read the subtle changes in Chief Running Bear's expression, and today something was different. There was a weight in the chief's manner that suggested decisions had been made, paths chosen that could not be unchanged. "Chief," Samuel replied, matching the formal tone. "How are your daughters today?" Morningstar grows stronger. Swift Eagle teaches her the English words you have shown her. The chief's voice carried pride in his daughter's adaptability and intelligence. "But today I come to speak of other matters." He gestured toward Samuel's rundown property, taking in the broken fences, the sparse cattle, and the house that needed more repairs than Samuel could afford. "Your land is in trouble, it wasn't a question." Samuel had tried to hide his financial difficulties, but a man as observant as Chief Running Bear would have noticed the signs of a failing ranch, the overdue tax notices that arrived with increasing frequency, the way Samuel rationed supplies, the desperate attempts to make repairs with materials salvaged from other broken things. "The bank wants money I don't have," Samuel admitted. 30 days to find $2,000 or lose everything. Chief Running Bear nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "In my world, a man who shows honor to another man's daughters earns great respect. In your world, respect does not pay debts." The chief's understanding of white economics was clearly better than Samuel had realized. But sometimes the two worlds can help each other. Samuel felt something shift in the conversation, a sense that Chief Running Bear was approaching a subject that had been carefully considered from every angle. The chief had a proposal, something that could solve Samuel's problems while serving Apache interests. But what could a failing rancher possibly offer to a powerful tribal leader? "My people have gold," Chief Running Bear said simply. "Hidden gold from the old Spanish mines, kept secret for many generations. We use it sometimes to buy guns and supplies from traders who ask no questions." Samuel's eyes widened at this revelation. Spanish gold was legendary throughout the territory, but most people assumed the stories were myths designed to fuel treasure hunters' dreams. "We could give you gold to save your land," the chief continued, "but gold from Apache hands would bring questions. Soldiers, men like Brennan who would want to know where it came from. The problem was obvious once stated. Any sudden wealth on Samuel's part would attract exactly the kind of attention that could endanger the tribe's carefully guarded secrets. Samuel waited, sensing that the chief was building toward something larger than a simple loan. Chief Running Bear studied the horizon for a moment as if gathering courage for what came next. "There is another way," he said finally. "A way that helps both our peoples but requires great trust." The proposal, when it came, was unlike anything Samuel could have imagined. Chief Running Bear wanted to establish a trading post on Samuel's land, a neutral meeting ground where Apache and white settlers could conduct business safely. Samuel would be the official owner and operator, but the venture would be secretly funded and supplied by the tribe. The profits would be split equally, giving Samuel enough income to save his ranch while providing the Apache with a legitimate way to trade their goods without revealing the extent of their wealth. "You would be the face that white men see," the chief explained. "A rancher who found a way to make his land profitable through honest trade. My people would bring furs, crafts, sometimes horses to trade for tools, blankets, medicine. Nothing that would attract soldiers or treasure hunters, but enough to make both of us prosperous." The beauty of the plan lay in its simplicity. Samuel's ranch would become a bridge between two worlds, allowing peaceful commerce while protecting Apache secrets. But it would also make him permanently connected to the tribe, dependent on their continued goodwill and protection. If relations between Apache and whites deteriorated, Samuel could find himself caught in the middle of a war. "Why me?" Samuel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Why trust me with something this important?" Chief Running Bear's answer was characteristically direct. "Because you risked everything to protect my daughters when you had nothing to gain. Because you asked for nothing when you could demand much. Because Swift Eagle says you have the heart of an honorable man, and she is rarely wrong about such things." The mention of Swift Eagle's opinion sent an unexpected warmth through Samuel's chest. Over the past weeks, he had found himself looking forward to their conversations, impressed by her quick wit and deep wisdom. But he hadn't dared hope that she thought well of him in return. The possibility that this remarkable young woman saw something worthwhile in a failed rancher was both thrilling and terrifying. Samuel looked around at his broken-down ranch, at the life that had been slowly dying for years, and realized that Chief Running Bear was offering him more than financial salvation. He was offering purpose, connection, a chance to be part of something larger than his own struggles. But acceptance would mean stepping into a world where the stakes were higher than personal success or failure, where his choices could affect the survival of an entire people. Samuel's answer came not in words but in actions. The next morning he rode into town and paid his overdue debts with gold coins that Chief Running Bear had provided as an advance on their partnership. The bank president, who had been preparing foreclosure papers, suddenly found himself shaking hands with a rancher whose fortunes had apparently taken a miraculous turn. Samuel told a carefully prepared story about discovering a market for his cattle among traveling traders, an explanation that raised no suspicions in a territory where unusual business arrangements were common. Within 6 months, Morrison's trading post had become the most successful commercial venture in 3 counties. White settlers arrived regularly to purchase beautifully crafted Apache goods, leatherwork, pottery, and blankets that were far superior to anything available in distant cities. The Apache in turn acquired tools, medicines, and manufactured goods through legitimate channels, avoiding the dangerous dealings with black market traders that had previously been their only option. Swift Eagle had become Samuel's unofficial partner in running the trading post, her fluency in both languages and her understanding of both cultures making her invaluable in negotiations. What surprised everyone, including Samuel himself, was how naturally they worked together. She handled the Apache side of transactions while he dealt with white customers, but their collaboration went deeper than simple business efficiency. They had developed an easy partnership that felt as natural as breathing, built on mutual respect and shared goals. Morningstar had recovered completely and returned to live with her people, but she visited the trading post frequently, often bringing young Apache women who were curious about the white world. Samuel's ranch had become a place where cultural exchange happened naturally, where prejudices were harder to maintain when people met as individuals rather than as representatives of hostile groups. Children from both communities played together in his yard while their parents conducted business, creating friendships that crossed racial lines. The success of the trading post had attracted attention from territorial officials, but the kind of attention Samuel and Chief Running Bear had hoped for. Government representatives saw it as a model for peaceful relations between settlers and Native Americans, a practical solution to conflicts that usually ended in bloodshed. Samuel found himself occasionally hosting official visitors who wanted to understand how such cooperation was possible. But the real transformation had happened in Samuel himself. The broken man who had nearly lost everything to drought and debt had discovered a purpose that went far beyond personal survival. He woke each morning with energy he hadn't felt since Martha's death, driven by the knowledge that his work was building bridges between worlds that had been at war for generations. The relationship between Samuel and Swift Eagle had evolved as well, though neither spoke directly about the growing bond between them. She had moved into the small cabin Samuel built near the main house, officially to serve as the Apache representative at the trading post, but their evening conversations by the fire had become the highlight of both their days. They shared stories of their different worlds, their hopes for the future, and gradually, their feelings for each other. Chief Running Bear watched this development with the careful attention of a father and a leader. The idea of his daughter forming a romantic attachment to a white man would have been unthinkable under different circumstances, but Samuel Morrison had proven himself in ways that transcended racial boundaries. When Swift Eagle finally came to her father to discuss her feelings, the chief's response surprised even her. "He saved your life and your sister's life when he had nothing to gain," Chief Running Bear told his daughter. "He kept his word when breaking it would have been easier. He has made both our peoples richer through honest work." The chief paused, studying his daughter's face with the intensity that made him such an effective leader. "But most important, he makes you happy in a way I have not seen since you were a child." The proposal, when it finally came, happened on the first anniversary of the day Samuel had rescued the sisters. He asked Swift Eagle to marry him not with grand gestures or elaborate speeches, but with the simple honesty that had characterized their entire relationship. They were sitting on the porch of the trading post, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, when he turned to her and said, "I'd like to spend the rest of my life building this dream with you." Her answer was equally direct. "I thought you would never ask." The wedding ceremony that followed became legendary throughout the territory, a celebration that blended Apache and white traditions in ways that had never been attempted before. Chief Running Bear performed the Apache portion of the ceremony, while the circuit preacher handled the Christian elements, creating a union that was legally recognized by both communities. Guests included Apache warriors, white settlers, territorial officials, and even a few reformed bounty hunters who had learned to respect Samuel's moral courage. Jake Brennan, the bounty hunter who had started it all, had eventually left the territory after word spread about his attempted assault on Chief Running Bear's daughters. The reputation he had built through intimidation crumbled when people learned he had tried to attack innocent young women, and his badge was revoked by territorial authorities who couldn't afford the diplomatic complications his actions had created. He drifted into obscurity, a reminder that evil actions eventually carry their own punishment. Samuel Morrison, the penniless rancher who had risked everything for two Apache sisters, became one of the most respected men in Texas. The trading post he built with Chief Running Bear grew into a small town where people of different backgrounds lived and worked together in relative harmony. His marriage to Swift Eagle produced 3 children who grew up speaking both English and Apache, serving as bridges between their two peoples. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of peaceful relations between settlers and Native Americans in Texas, they often pointed to Morrison's trading post as proof that cooperation was possible when people were willing to look beyond prejudice and see the common humanity in others. Samuel's decision to help 2 frightened young women had changed not just his own destiny, but the fate of countless others who benefited from the peace his actions helped create. The ranch that had once been a symbol of failure became a symbol of hope, proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the simple courage to do what is right when everything seems lost. Samuel Morrison had risked everything for 2 Apache sisters, and in saving them, he had saved himself and created a legacy that would endure for generations. On quiet evenings, when the trading post was closed and their children were asleep, Samuel and Swift Eagle would sit on their porch and remember that first terrible day when violence had brought them together. They had taken the worst moment of their lives and transformed it into the foundation of something beautiful, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and love could prevail over hatred and fear. The penniless rancher had indeed found his destiny, and it was far greater than anything he could have imagined in his days of desperation and loss.